The envelope landed on the floor of Myra's room at 6:30 in the morning, slipped under the door by a hand she never saw. She was already awake. She was always already awake. She had been on her knees at 5, scrubbing the long corridor outside Lady Seraphine's chambers, working the stone with the kind of quiet focus that comes from doing something so many times that your body just knows what to do without being asked. Her knuckles were still damp when she picked up the envelope. The paper was thick, cream-colored, smooth in a way that her hands had no right to be touching. She turned it over. The Asheville crest pressed into the wax seal stared back at her, gilded edges on the envelope. Her name written across the front in ink, so precise it looked like it had been measured with a ruler. Myra. Just the one name, as if whoever had written it had debated whether even that was worth including. She set it on her narrow bed. She finished dressing. She tied her hair back the way she always did, pulled on her uniform, checked that her collar was straight in the small cracked mirror on the wall. Then she sat on the edge of the mattress and opened the envelope, because she had learned a long time ago that the only thing worse than knowing bad news was not knowing it. Inside was an invitation, printed on cardstock with gold lettering, formal in every possible way, the language of it so stiff and ceremonious that reading it felt like being addressed by a building. The annual gathering of the great houses of Asheville, the Grand Hall, this coming Saturday evening, formal dress required, attendance expected. Her name was at the top. Myra put the card down, she picked up her bucket, she went back to work. She did not talk about the invitation that day, not because she was afraid of what people would say. She already knew exactly what they would say. She had heard the same notes played in different arrangements for 6 years. The slightly too loud laughter, the sideways looks, the sharp little remarks dressed up as observations so that if you reacted to them, you were the one being difficult. She was not going to react. She cleaned 4 bedrooms that morning. She pressed 3 sets of linens. She helped in the kitchen at noon, peeling vegetables with 2 other women from the household staff. Nell sat across from her, 32 years old and wide-shouldered, and always smelling faintly of lavender soap. Nell was the only person in the house who looked at Myra without an agenda. "You're quiet," Nell said. "I'm always quiet," Myra said. "You're quieter than usual." Myra peeled another carrot, set it in the bowl. "I got an invitation to the gathering." Nell stopped working, the knife hovered in the air. "The great house's gathering." "Yes, they invited you. My name is on the card." Nell set the knife down. She looked at Myra the way you look at someone when you're trying to figure out whether they understand what's being done to them. "Myra, they did not invite you because they want you there." "I know. They invited you because they want everyone to watch you walk in and stand in the wrong place and not know which fork to use and feel small. They want something to laugh about on Sunday morning." "I know," Myra said again. She picked up another carrot. Nell shook her head slowly. "Then why are you still holding the invitation?" Myra looked at her hands. She hadn't noticed that she was still gripping the card, still holding it at the edge of the table. She set it down. "Because," she said, and then she stopped. Because her mother had told her, in the last conversation they ever had, that the only way to survive people who wanted to shrink you was to take up more space, not less. Because 6 years of getting smaller had not made her safer. Because she was 24 years old and she was tired. She didn't say any of that to Nell. She said, "I'm going." Nell looked at her for a long time, then she picked up her knife and went back to peeling. "All right," she said. "Then we're going to find you something decent to wear." That was on Wednesday. By Thursday, the story was already moving through the house the way stories do in places where people live in close quarters and have very little else to talk about. Myra heard it in pieces. A laugh outside the laundry room, a sentence that stopped when she rounded a corner. She caught the eyes of 2 of the younger maids and watched them look away fast, the way you look away from something you're not sure whether to feel guilty about. Lady Seraphine heard about it on Thursday afternoon. Myra was delivering fresh linens to the upstairs wing when she heard the voice from behind the half-open sitting room door. Seraphine's voice had a particular quality to it, low and musical and carefully controlled, the kind of voice that had been trained since childhood to carry the right weight in the right rooms. "She's actually going," Seraphine said. A pause, another woman's voice lighter, amused, "Apparently." "In what, her uniform?" Seraphine laughed. It was a short sound, clean, like a lock clicking shut. Myra kept walking. She delivered the linens. She went back downstairs. She did not let herself stand still long enough to feel anything, because feeling things while standing still was how you ended up making decisions you hadn't planned for. Friday night, Nell came to her room with a dress draped over one arm, deep green, simple cut, old but well made, the kind of garment that had been worn by someone who knew quality. "My sister's," Nell said. "She's your size," she said to keep it. Myra held it up. The fabric was soft between her fingers. "It's not a ball gown," Nell said. "It's not going to compete with what they're wearing, but it's honest. It'll hold its head up in that room." "Good," Myra said, "so will I." She hung the dress on the back of the door and went to bed. She lay on her back in the dark and looked at the ceiling and did not think about the gathering or the invitation or Lady Seraphine's laugh. She thought about her mother instead, about the small house they had shared when Myra was a girl, before the money ran out and the hospital bills came and everything got very hard very fast. About sitting in the kitchen early in the mornings before anyone else was awake, and her mother making tea, and the way the light came through the window at a low angle and turned everything gold. Her mother had never been invited anywhere that mattered either, but she had moved through the world with such complete and quiet certainty about who she was that people had felt it when they stood near her, even the ones who should have dismissed her, even them. Myra fell asleep thinking about that light. Saturday came in gray and cold. The autumn sky over Asheville was the color of old pewter. She could smell rain in the air when she opened the small window above her bed. She did her morning work without rushing, the same as every Saturday, because she was not going to be the kind of person who was so shaken by one evening that she let her actual life slip. She cleaned, she helped with the mid-morning preparations in the kitchen. She ate lunch in the small room off the corridor where the staff always ate, at the same wooden table, with the same chipped cup that was hers by habit if not by any official claim. At 2 in the afternoon, she went to her room and gave herself 3 hours. She washed her hair. She was careful and slow about it. She sat by the window and let it dry in the weak afternoon light. She pressed the green dress with the iron from the supply closet and hung it back on the door. She cleaned her shoes, the pair she owned that were closest to formal, black and low-heeled and worn at the toe, but polished now to a dark gleam. She did not put on anything she did not own. She did not borrow jewelry or try to look like someone she was not. She brushed her hair back and pinned it simply and looked at herself in the cracked mirror and stayed with what she saw for a moment. She looked tired. She had looked tired for 6 years. Underneath the tired there was something else. She couldn't have named it precisely. It wasn't defiance exactly. It wasn't bravado. It was something quieter and more durable than either of those things. She pinned the invitation to the front of her dress, right over her heart. The Grand Hall of Asheville was a 20-minute walk from the servants' quarters, across the estate grounds, past the formal gardens, through the arched stone passage that connected the working half of the estate to the side that was built for looking at. Myra walked it in the early dark, her shoes on the gravel path, the lights of the hall already warm and golden ahead of her. She could hear music from outside. She could see the shapes of people through the tall windows, moving and still, the colors of their clothing shifting like something underwater. She stopped at the bottom of the wide stone steps. She stood there for exactly 30 seconds. Not from fear, from the same instinct that makes you pause at the edge of cold water, not because you're not going in, but because you want to go in with your eyes open and your lungs full. Then she walked up the steps. The doors were held by 2 attendants in formal livery. They looked at her. They looked at each other. One of them reached for the handle. "Name," the other one said. She handed him the invitation. He read it. His expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes. He opened the door. The warmth of the hall came at her like a hand. Heat and candlelight and perfume and the low constant hum of 300 conversations layered over each other. The ceiling was vaulted and painted. The floor was the same pale stone she had cleaned on her hands and knees 100 mornings. The tables along the walls were loaded with food and flowers and glassware that caught the light and threw it back in small bright pieces. She stood in the doorway for just a moment. She felt every single person in her immediate field of vision register her presence, not all at once. It moved through the crowd the way a sound moves through water, a head turning here, a pause there, a hand touching an arm to direct someone's attention. She knew what they were seeing. A girl in a simple green dress who did not belong here. A girl who knew all the hidden angles of this room. A girl who had been invited as the evening's small cruelty and had come anyway. She took a breath. She walked in. Not quickly, not with her head down. She walked the way her mother had taught her to walk, which was as if she had somewhere to be and was choosing to take the long way. She walked to the center of the room and she stood there, and she did not reach for anything to hold, and she did not look at the floor. Lady Seraphine across the room turned at that moment, found her immediately. Their eyes met across 50 feet of candlelit space. Seraphine smiled. It was the kind of smile that belonged on the face of someone who had already decided how the evening would end, full and warm and entirely certain of itself. Myra looked at her for a count of 3. Then she looked away, not because she was frightened, but because Seraphine was not the most interesting thing in the room. She moved toward the edge of the hall, took a glass from a passing tray, and stood with her back to a column. She watched. She was very good at watching. She had spent 6 years becoming excellent at it. She noted who stood with whom, and who laughed too quickly when Seraphine spoke. She noted the young women at the far end of the room who looked bored under their careful expressions. She noted the older men near the window who had the manner of people who held real power in the estate and were tired of pretending otherwise. She noted the door at the north end of the hall that she had always known was there, the one that led to the private garden. She noted the loose tile near the base of the second column from the left, the one she had nearly tripped on twice while cleaning. She noted that the flower arrangements were slightly lopsided, which meant they had been done in a hurry. She was standing in the room that had been designed to defeat her. She was comfortable in it. That was not something they had planned for. Seraphine made her move within the first 15 minutes. She crossed the room with 2 of her circle at her sides, the particular formation that meant she was coming to perform rather than to speak. She was dressed in pale gold. Her neck was long and her posture was extraordinary, and everything about her communicated that she had been raised to occupy exactly this kind of space. She stopped in front of Myra. She looked at the dress first, then up. She let the silence do its work for just long enough. "Myra," she said. Her voice was warm and surprised, as if she were delighted to find the furniture talking. "You actually came." "I was invited," Myra said. Seraphine laughed. It was light and musical, and it invited the people near them to join in, and several of them did. "Well," Seraphine said, "you look very—" She paused, the pause itself doing the damage more than any word could. "Comfortable." "I am," Myra said. "Thank you." Seraphine blinked just once. The word "thank you" had not been part of what she was expecting. "I do hope you're enjoying the evening," Seraphine said. She reached out as she spoke and took the glass from Myra's hand, not roughly, just casually, the way you would pick up something left unattended and set it on a nearby surface. A small thing. A needle in the shape of a gesture. Myra's hand stayed in the same position for a moment after the glass was gone. Then she turned slightly to one side, picked up a fresh glass from a tray that a server happened to be carrying past, and took a sip. She did not look at Seraphine while she did it. Seraphine's smile stayed on her face, but something behind it changed. It was the smallest possible shift, visible only to someone who was watching closely. The evening was not going exactly as written. "Enjoy yourself," Seraphine said and moved away. Myra watched her go. She took another sip of her drink. The laughter from Seraphine's circle faded as they moved on to something more interesting. The room settled back around her. She exhaled through her nose, slowly. The way her mother had taught her. She was still standing in the center of the room that had been meant to swallow her whole. It hadn't. She stood there in her honest green dress with her polished worn-toe shoes and the gilded invitation still pinned to her chest. And she stood there the way a person stands when they have decided, somewhere below the level of words, that they are exactly where they mean to be. The music shifted, a new piece, something slow and formal. She did not know yet that the doors at the north end of the hall were about to open. She did not know yet that the entire evening was about to change direction so sharply that no one in the room would see it coming. She was just standing there, breathing, holding her glass. Waiting, without knowing she was waiting, for the moment that was already on its way to her. The north doors opened at 8:15. Myra heard the change before she saw it. The music stopped mid-phrase, the way music only stops when something more important has entered the room. The conversations didn't die all at once. They faded in a wave, the way voices fade when each person notices something and falls quiet, and the silence spreads outward from that point. From the north end of the hall to the south end, in a matter of about 4 seconds, 300 people stopped talking. Myra turned. The man who had walked through the doors was tall, broad through the shoulders. He wore dark formal clothing with no decoration except a single silver pin at the collar, and he wore it the way certain people wear things, as if the clothes were an afterthought that happened to be correct. His hair was dark, cut short, slightly unkempt in a way that was not careless, but rather suggested that he had more important things to think about than his hair, and was entirely right to think so. His face was angled and still, not cold. Still, there is a difference. Cold means the warmth is absent, still means the warmth is there, but it is not being offered to anyone who has not earned it. He moved into the room at a pace that was neither fast nor slow, and the crowd adjusted itself around him without being asked. They opened a path for him, the way water opens around something that moves through it with enough density, not because anyone was afraid of him, but because something in the way he occupied space made crowding around him feel rude. King Kalan of the Northern Reach had arrived. Myra had heard of him the way everyone in the Asheville estate had heard of him, in pieces, in partial sentences dropped around dinner tables and in hallways. The Northern Reach was far from Asheville, a colder and harder country than this one, and its king had a reputation that came in contradictions, decisive in war, reluctant at ceremony, fair to his people in a way that made the nobility nervous. Unmarried at 31, which everyone agreed was a problem, though no one could agree on whose problem it was. She had expected someone who looked like power performing itself. That was what men of that position usually looked like in rooms like this, polished and conscious of every eye on them, leaning into the attention the way a plant leans toward light. He was not doing any of that. He came through the room as if the room were a thing he was passing through on the way somewhere else, and as if that somewhere else was simply a quieter version of this same room, one where he did not have to shake hands and hold his face in the arrangement that formal occasions required. He was greeted by Lord Asheville near the center of the hall. They shook hands, they exchanged words. Kalan nodded once, smiled once, the smile brief and real rather than decorative. Lord Asheville gestured toward the room in a way that said, "All of this is yours," and Kalan's face said politely, "Thank you, I'd rather not." Myra watched all of this from her position against the column and thought, he doesn't want to be here either. It was not a judgment, it was a recognition. Around her, the room had come back to life. The conversations resumed, louder now and faster, fueled by the particular energy that a significant arrival creates. She could hear his name moving through the crowd like something thrown into water, rippling outward. Lady Seraphine had already repositioned herself. She was at the edge of the cleared space around Lord Asheville and the king, arranged at a precise angle, in the specific posture of someone who is making herself available to be noticed. Her pale gold dress caught the candlelight beautifully. Her chin was tilted just so. She was, Myra thought, genuinely skilled at this, whatever this was. Kalan was escorted around the room. Lord Asheville made introductions. Hands were shaken. Names were given. Myra watched his face through each of these exchanges and saw the same thing each time. Present, attentive, perfectly courteous, and somewhere just behind the eyes, somewhere no one was probably looking for, very tired. She recognized that look. She had worn it herself for 6 years. He circled the room slowly. Lord Asheville moved ahead of him, clearing the social path. 3 women in sequence angled themselves into his orbit and were received with the same correct warmth and let go. Seraphine's turn came. She stepped forward with grace and said something that made Lord Asheville laugh, and Kalan smiled his brief real smile and exchanged words with her and moved on. Myra turned back toward the south end of the hall. She was not watching him for reasons she was trying to hide from herself. She was watching him because he was, in a room full of performance, the only thing that was not performing. She found that interesting in the way she found the loose tile interesting or the lopsided flower arrangements, honest things in dishonest places. She did not expect him to notice her. There was no reason for him to notice her. She was standing against a column in a simple green dress with her hair pinned plainly and her second glass of the evening in her hand, wearing an invitation on her chest like a small private joke that only she was in on. She was not positioned to be seen. She was not arranged to attract attention. She was just standing there, watching, the same thing she had been doing for most of her adult life in rooms that did not technically want her in them. She had turned back toward the long table at the south wall, looking at the flower arrangements and confirming her earlier assessment that they had been done in a hurry, when she felt something. She would not have been able to explain it clearly. It was not a sound or a movement. It was more like the kind of awareness that happens when someone enters a room you have your back to and you know they are there before you turn around. A shift in the quality of the air, a sense of being located by something. She turned. He was looking at her. Not the way people had been looking at her all evening, with that particular mixture of amusement and contempt and the private satisfaction of watching someone be in the wrong place. He was looking at her differently, the way you look at something that has surprised you, not unpleasantly. The distance between them was perhaps 30 feet. Across that distance, across the shifting crowd of formally dressed people and the candlelight and the low hum of resumed conversation, his gaze was entirely clear. She met it. She did not look away, and she did not look down, and she did not perform anything. She just looked back at him the way she looked at everything, with the attention of someone who had learned that seeing clearly was the only reliable tool she had. For a moment, neither of them moved. Lord Asheville said something to him. Kaylan turned back. She was still looking at him. He was still looking at her. And then Lord Asheville took his arm to steer him toward the next introduction, and the eye contact broke, and the room closed back around both of them. Myra faced the flower arrangements again. Her heart was doing something she chose not to pay attention to. She set her glass down on the edge of the table. She straightened her back. She thought about the lopsided lilies, and why the right side of the arrangement was higher than the left, and whether whoever had done it had simply been tired, or whether they had been given the wrong vessels and improvised badly. She thought about practical things because practical things were stable, and she needed something stable under her feet right now. The evening went on. Seraphine circled back to her group on the east side of the hall. The laughter from that quarter came in waves, and Myra did not have to look to know she was the subject of at least some of it. A young man she didn't recognize approached her at one point, mid-20s, with the slightly glassy look of someone who had been drinking since before the gathering officially began. He said something she didn't quite catch over the music. She looked at him pleasantly and didn't respond, and he drifted away. At 8:50, someone from Seraphine's circle came and stood near her. Not Seraphine, one of the others, a woman named Camille who was 28 and known in the house for the precision of her opinions. She had dark hair and a sharp face, and she stood near Myra without quite looking at her directly, which was a specific social technique, the thing you do when you want to say something but want to maintain plausible distance from having said it. "I imagine this is quite different from your usual Saturday evenings," Camille said, to the room in general. "I imagine," Myra said, also to the room in general. A pause. "Lady Seraphine thought it would be generous to include you," Camille said, "to give you the chance to experience something like this." Myra took a breath, let it out. How kind of her. Camille turned slightly toward her now. Her eyes moved down from Myra's face to the dress, to the shoes, back up to the invitation pinned to the dress. The invitation clearly puzzled her. It had not been part of the plan for Myra to wear it. It turned the whole gesture inside out. The invitation had been meant to be held with uncertain hands, the evidence of how out of place she was. Worn on her chest, it was something else entirely. "That's a," Camille started, and then didn't finish. "The invitation," Myra said, "I thought I should keep it close, in case anyone questioned whether I belonged here." Another pause. "You shouldn't take it personally," Camille said. "It was a gesture, that's all, a generous one." Myra looked at her, not unkindly, just directly. "I don't take it personally," she said. "I'm just here." She was just here. That was the full extent of it. She was just here, standing in a room that had planned for her embarrassment, and the embarrassment had not arrived, and the room did not know what to do with that. Camille moved away. At 9 o'clock, something happened on the north side of the hall that drew attention. She couldn't see what it was from where she stood, but the crowd shifted, and there was a ripple of energy, voices rising. She assumed it was a toast or an announcement. She moved slightly to one side for a better angle. And then the crowd parted. Not for a toast, not for an announcement. Kaylan was moving through the room, not in the direction of Lord Asheville, not toward the dais at the far end. He was moving, with the same unhurried certainty with which he did everything, toward the south end of the hall. Toward the long table. Toward her. Myra stayed exactly where she was. She watched him come. She noted that 2 of Lord Ashville's men followed a few steps behind him, the way such people always followed, close enough to be available, far enough to give the impression of privacy. She noted that Seraphine, across the room, had registered his movement and was watching with an expression that was still controlled but had something new in it. Something careful. He came to a stop in front of her. Not 2 feet away, not the distance of polite introduction. The distance of someone who had walked across a room to speak to a specific person and arrived at the destination. Up close she did not have a simple word for it. She had grown up around the sons of wealthy families, had worked in the houses of people who considered themselves important, and she knew what men with power looked like when they were near you. They usually filled the space between themselves and you with something: authority, assessment, the particular brand of ease that comes from having never been told no. He filled the space differently, solidly, quietly, as if he were made of something denser than the air around him, but not in a way that pressed. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. It was not uncomfortable. It was the look of someone who was actually seeing you. "You're standing in the middle of a room that does not especially want you here," he said. His voice was low, unhurried, not unkind. "Yes," she said. "And you've been here the entire evening." "I was invited," she said. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, something just before a smile, the moment where you decide whether or not to let it happen. "You were," he said. He glanced briefly at the invitation on her dress. "I see you've brought proof." "I thought it was wise," she said. He looked at her for another long moment. She looked back. The noise of the hall was around them, and the candlelight, and the pressure of 300 people who had now noticed that the King of the Northern Reach had walked across the room and was standing in close conversation with the Ashville estate maid, and not one single person in the room knew what to do with that. "You are the most interesting person here," he said. It was not a compliment exactly, or rather it was too direct and too plain to be a compliment in the usual sense. It was a statement, the way you would say the sky is that color or the stone is that weight. "I know," she said. He did smile then, just briefly. And then it was gone, and he was looking at her again with that clear, attentive look, the one that was starting to make her chest feel like it had something fragile inside it that she was trying to carry carefully. "Would you dance with me?" he said. Not "would you like to," not "might I have the honor." He asked it the way he did everything, simply and without decoration. She looked at him. She thought about her mother. She thought about the dress and the invitation and 6 years of carrying herself through rooms like this. She thought about Seraphine across the hall and Camille and the laughter and the cloth that had been thrown at her feet and the glass that had been taken from her hand. She thought about all of it for exactly as long as it took to take one slow breath. "Yes," she said. He offered his hand. She took it, and the room, which had stopped pretending not to watch, watched. The music changed. Not on its own. The conductor at the far end of the hall, a thin older man named Aldrich who had played at Asheville events for 20 years, saw what was happening and made a decision in the space of about 3 seconds. He signaled his ensemble with a small motion, and they shifted, smoothly and without interruption, into a slower piece. Something with room in it. Something that suited 2 people who needed space to be in rather than a crowd that needed something to step to. Aldrich was, Myra would think later, the most perceptive person in the room that evening. Kaelan led her to the floor. He did not lead her in the way that meant taking charge. He led her in the way that meant here is where we are going, and I am going first to make sure there is room. There is a difference between those 2 things, and she felt it clearly. People moved, not all of them, but enough that a small open space formed on the floor, the size that 2 people need when they want to dance without performing. She was aware, acutely and continuously, of every set of eyes in the room that was currently aimed in their direction, which was, she estimated, most of them. She put her right hand in his. She put her left hand on his shoulder. He placed his on her back. He danced the way he did everything else, without excess, without performance. He was good at it, not in the showy way of someone who had been trained for display, but in the quiet way of someone who had learned something well enough that it had become natural. His movements were clean. He did not lay too firmly or too loosely. He adjusted to her without making her feel adjusted to. She was not a trained dancer. She had never been trained for any of this, but she was good with her body in the particular way of someone who had spent years doing physical work, someone who understood weight and balance and how to move in a small space without knocking things over. She followed his lead without stumbling. She kept her head up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The music was the only sound between them, and around them the room buzzed quietly with its own noise. But where they were, it was just the music and the particular silence of two people discovering, in real time, that they are not uncomfortable with each other, which is not a small thing. "Tell me your name," he said. "Myra." "Myra," he said, as if placing it somewhere specific. "And how long have you worked in this house?" 6 years, He didn't ask the obvious next question, which was why. She noted that. He just nodded once, as if 6 years was a number he was putting alongside other things he had already observed about her and arriving at something. "You've been standing against that column since before I arrived," he said. "You noticed me when you walked in." "Yes." She considered that. Why? He looked at her with an expression that suggested the answer was more obvious to him than it was to her. "Because you were the only person in the room who looked like they had nowhere to be impressed by." She thought about that. She understood what he meant, and the understanding made her feel something she didn't reach for a word for. "They invited me to be laughed at," she said. She said it plainly, without self-pity and without performance, just the way you would state the temperature outside. "You probably know that." "Yes," he said. "And you crossed the room anyway." "Yes," he said again. "Why?" she said. He thought about it. She could see him actually considering the question rather than reaching for a ready answer. "Because whatever they intended when they sent that invitation, you made it mean something else entirely when you walked through that door." She didn't say anything for a moment. The music moved them in a slow circle. She was aware of his hand on her back, warm and steady. She was aware of his eyes, which were dark and which were looking at her with attention. "What did I make it mean?" she asked. "That you decided," he said. She looked at him. "That's it," he said. "You decided. Whatever this was meant to be, you decided it would be something different, and then you just stood there being what you decided. Most people can't do that in rooms like this. Most people can't do that in rooms nothing like this." She looked at him for a long time. The music was still going, she was still dancing. Her chest had the fragile, careful feeling again. "You've been watching me all evening," she said. "I've been watching the room," he said. "You were the most interesting part of it." Lady Seraphine on the far side of the dance floor had positioned herself in direct line of sight. Myra could see her in her peripheral vision, the pale gold dress catching light, the expression on her face doing something complicated. The women on either side of her were watching too. The whole room was watching. It was the kind of moment that would be described differently by everyone who was present in it, each version slightly adjusted to suit the teller. Myra decided not to think about that. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "You've spent the evening being introduced to people your host chose for you, women with the right titles and the right families." She paused. She wanted to say this correctly. "Why would you spend any of it on me?" He was quiet for a moment, not the quiet of someone who doesn't have an answer, the quiet of someone who is choosing the precise one. "Because every person Lord Asheville has introduced me to this evening wanted something from me," he said. "A trade agreement, a political connection, a marriage that would benefit their family's standing. Every conversation I have had tonight has been a negotiation dressed as a conversation." He looked at her steadily. "You don't want anything from me." "I don't even know you," she said. "Exactly," he said. She understood. It was strange and specific, and she understood it completely. She had spent 6 years in a house where every interaction was a calculation, where even a kind word from a member of the family came with a cost attached. She knew what it felt like to want nothing from someone, and to have that want nothing be, to them, the rarest and most comfortable thing in the room. The song was ending. She could feel it in the way the music changed its weight. "After this," he said, "they're going to talk." "They've been talking since I walked in," she said. "After this, they'll say things that are harder to ignore." "I know. Does that matter to you?" She thought about it. She thought about the small room she would go back to tonight, and the apron on the chair, and the crack in the mirror, and the morning corridor she would clean at 5, and Nell asking her how it went. She thought about the dress she would hang back on the hook and the polished shoes she would set back under the bed. "No," she said. He nodded, one slow nod. The music stopped. They stood still for a moment. Then he released her hand, took a small step back, and inclined his head to her in the formal bow of acknowledgement that a king makes when showing deliberate respect to someone, not the shallow tilt that passes for courtesy, a full and unhurried thing. Around them, the room was absolutely silent. Myra held herself still. She gave him a small nod in return, dignified and clean. She did not curtsy. She had thought about that before she had come tonight. She was not of the nobility. She owed no one here a curtsy. She gave respect where she chose to give it. Right now she chose to give him a nod. He almost smiled again. Then the room came back to itself. Sound returned in a rush. Conversations sparked. Lord Asheville was moving across the floor toward them, his face wearing an expression that Myra couldn't read and didn't try to. Several other people were moving too. Seraphine had not moved. She was standing very still in a way that was the exact opposite of calm. Kaelan turned to receive Lord Asheville and the approaching cluster of important men. Myra moved back to her column. She picked up her glass. Her hand was steady. She was proud of her hand for being steady. Around her, conversations had fractured into pieces of the same conversation, and all of them were about her, or about him, or about the two of them together for those 4 minutes on the floor, and she could hear her name in the syllables without being able to catch the full sentences, and she chose not to try. She looked at the lopsided lilies. One particular stem had fallen since she last looked at it. The whole right side of the arrangement had started to tilt. If no one fixed it in the next 10 minutes, it was going to fall over entirely. She thought about mentioning it to one of the servers. She thought about the fact that this was the precise kind of thought that proved she was still herself, still Myra, still standing in a room as a person who noticed when things needed fixing, regardless of what had just happened on the dance floor. She was still herself. Good. Camille appeared at her elbow, not with the studied casual approach from earlier. Directly this time, facing her, something sharp in her eyes that was close to anger but was actually something more like panic. "What was that?" Camille said. "A dance," Myra said. "You do not dance with a king." He asked. Myra, Camille's voice dropped. "Do you understand what you've done? Do you understand how this looks to his house, to Lord Asheville?" "He's a guest of the house," Myra said. "He asked me, I said yes. I didn't ask to be invited here either, and I came anyway." Camille stared at her. "You're making a very big mistake." "Which one?" Myra said. Camille blinked. "Which mistake?" Myra said again. "Coming tonight, dancing when asked, having a name, breathing in the wrong building." Her voice was still level, still quiet. She was not raising it and she was not going to. "Tell me specifically which one so I know which part to regret." Camille's mouth closed, opened, closed again. She walked away. Myra turned back to the room. The evening was still going. The musicians had started something new. People were beginning to move back to the floor. She could see Kaelan near the far wall now, in conversation with 2 men she didn't recognize, his back half toward her, and he was listening to them with that attentive quality he brought to everything. He did not look back at her. She didn't knight him too. She stood at her column for another 40 minutes. She drank one more glass of something that tasted like pears. She watched the room do what rooms like this do, which is spin itself around its own most significant moment of the evening, and process it until everyone had said their piece about it, and the music had covered the words and the candles had burned lower. At 10 past 10, she set her glass down on the nearest surface, smoothed the front of the green dress with both hands and walked to the south exit. She did not look toward the north wall. She did not look for him. She walked through the south doors and down the steps and across the gravel path in the autumn dark, and the cold air met her face like a clean thing, like something honest after a long time indoors. She walked back across the estate grounds. The lights of the grand hall faded behind her. The gravel crunched under her polished shoes. Above her the clouds had broken slightly and she could see a portion of the sky, more stars than you could usually see in weather like this, cold and sharp and indifferent in the best possible way. She walked. When she got back to the servants' quarters, the corridor was quiet. A lamp burned low at the far end. She went to her room and closed the door and stood with her back against it in the dark for a moment. She unpinned the invitation from her dress. She looked at it, the gilded lettering, her name, the Asheville crest. She set it on the table by the bed instead of throwing it away. She did not fully understand in that moment why she was keeping it. She told herself it was in case she needed proof. She told herself practical things. She hung the green dress on the hook. She set the shoes under the bed. She braided her hair loosely for sleeping. She lay down. She stared at the ceiling. She thought about the way he had said the word decided, as if it were something remarkable, as if most people didn't do it. She thought about whether most people actually did or didn't, and she thought about the years she had spent in this house, and the people she had watched in that time, and she thought he was probably right. She thought about his hand on her back, steady and warm, not pressing, just there. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep for a long time, but she was not restless, she was still. The way you are still when something has shifted and you are taking inventory of yourself and finding carefully that you are intact. Outside, the autumn wind moved through the trees. Somewhere in the house a door closed. Somewhere further away a clock struck the half-hour. She was intact. She was still herself. She was also something else, something she did not have a word for yet, and she was going to wait and see what word arrived. She was good at waiting. 6 years had made her very good at it. She just hoped, pressing her eyes shut in the quiet of her small room, that whatever was coming was patient enough to wait for her to be ready. It wasn't nothing that mattered ever was, but she didn't know that yet. Sunday came in with rain. Myra heard it before she was fully awake, the steady sound of it on the small window above her bed, the kind of rain that has settled in and means to stay for the day. She lay still and listened to it for a moment. It had a weight and a rhythm to it that she found, as she always had, calming. Then her mind came fully awake, and she remembered the evening before, and the calm redistributed itself into something slightly more complicated. She got up anyway, she washed her face, she dressed, she tied her hair back. She had work. Sunday was not a rest day in the Asheville house, not for the staff. The family might sleep late and eat their large breakfast and sit in the morning room with their correspondence, but the house needed tending regardless. The fires needed laying. The floors needed going over. The kitchen was already running at full capacity, preparing the midday meal for however many guests from last night had stayed over. She went to work. The first thing she noticed was the quiet, not the usual quiet of a house in its early morning hours, a different kind. The kind that has been arranged. The kind where people are talking, but not loudly, and not where you can hear them clearly, and when you come around a corner the conversation changes register or stops entirely. She had experienced this before. She knew what it meant. It meant she was the subject. She cleaned the ground floor corridor without looking at anyone directly. She was aware of glances. She was aware of a maid she usually nodded to who did not meet her eyes today. She was aware of the sudden interest in other things that people developed when she walked into a room. At 8:30, Nell found her. Nell was carrying a stack of pressed table linens, and her expression was the expression of someone who has information they are trying to decide how to present. She fell into step beside Myra without preamble. "The entire house is talking about you," she said quietly. "I assumed," Myra said. "Not the way they were talking about you before. Before it was," Nell thought about the word, contemptuous. "Now it's something else." "What else?" Nell was quiet for a moment. They turned the corner into the service passage. Some of them are impressed, some of them are frightened, some of them are angry in that particular way of people who had a plan and watched it go wrong. She paused. And some of them are confused, which is probably the most dangerous. Confused is dangerous. Confused people make decisions based on not understanding something, Nell said. They try to correct a situation they don't have a full picture of. They push where they shouldn't. They had reached the linen closet. Nell began sorting the stack in her arms onto the shelves with the practiced ease of someone who had done it 10,000 times. Myra helped, taking the folded pieces and placing them with their corners aligned, the way she had been trained to. "He asked me to dance," Myra said. "I danced with him, that was all of it." "That was not all of it," Nell said. "That has never been all of anything in a house like this, you know that." She did know that. She had always known that. The house ran on interpretation. A thing that happened was less important than what everyone decided it meant, and everyone had already been deciding since before the music had stopped. Lady Seraphine has been in her room since this morning, Nell said. Her personal maid says she did not sleep well. Myra thought about Seraphine's face on the edge of the dance floor. That expression, the controlled one with the new thing in it underneath, the thing that was careful. She's not the only one you should think about, Nell said. Who else? Lord Asheville was seen speaking to his house steward at 7 this morning. That's very early for him, very. Myra set the last cloth on the shelf and straightened. What would he do? Nell looked at her directly. I don't know, but he is the kind of man who thinks in terms of the house's position. What is good for the house's standing, what is bad for it. A maid dancing with a visiting king is not a neutral thing to a man like that. I was invited as a guest last night, Myra said. You were invited as a prop, Nell said, not unkindly. Those are different things, and everyone in this house knows the difference, and the problem is that it didn't play out the way a prop is supposed to play out. Myra closed the linen closet door. The corridor around them was empty. Through the small window at the end of it, the rain was visible, grey and steady against the garden. What do you think I should do? Myra said. Nell thought about it. She was not someone who gave advice quickly. She thought through things carefully and then gave you what she actually thought, not what she thought you wanted to hear. It was one of the things Myra valued about her. I think you should do what you always do, Nell said finally. Work, be good at it, be steady, don't give anyone material they can use against you. She paused. And I think you should be very careful for the next few days about what you say, about how you're seen, about who you're near when you say things. Myra nodded. And Myra, Nell said, her voice was gentle but deliberate. Whatever last night felt like to you, whatever the dancing felt like, and whatever he said to you, I need you to be clear-headed about what it was and what it wasn't. Myra looked at her. He is a king, Nell said. He was passing through. He noticed something interesting and reached for it the way such people do. And then he will go back to the northern reach and you will still be here. And this house will still be this house. And what was interesting to him for an evening will still be your life when his carriage is 3 days down the road. The words landed the way true things land when you already knew them, but had been choosing not to look at them directly. Not painfully, just squarely. I know, Myra said. Do you? Yes, she said, and she meant it. I know exactly what last night was. She was not entirely sure that was true, but she knew it was the most useful thing to believe. She spent the rest of the morning in the practical certainties of the house. She helped in the kitchen from 10 until noon. She assisted with the midday setup for the guests who had stayed over. She carried plates and cleared tables and refilled water, and did it all with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything, and she watched the room from the corner of her eye. Lord Asheville sat at the head of the long table with several of his guests, and his face in repose was calculating in a way she had not noticed before, or perhaps had not been paying attention to. He was a man in his mid-50s, gray-haired and well-kept, with the comfortable authority of someone who had held this estate his entire adult life. He laughed at the right moments and spoke at the right moments, and his eyes, she noticed now, moved around the room with that same constant assessment that she had spent years observing in people who held things. He was assessing, this morning, what the evening before had cost him. She moved carefully around the room. She was efficient. She did not draw attention to herself. She was, as she had been for 6 years, present in the way that furniture is present, available and unobtrusive and capable of being looked through. But she was not furniture, and last night had made that harder for certain people to pretend. At 2 in the afternoon, she was carrying linens to the east wing, when one of Lord Asheville's personal attendants caught up with her in the corridor. A young man named Oliver, formal and precise, who carried messages and managed schedules with the energy of someone who knew that his usefulness depended on speed. "The Lord would like a word," Oliver said. She looked at him. "Now." "At your earliest convenience," Oliver said, which was the formal way of saying now. She set the linens down on the corridor table and followed him. Lord Asheville's study was on the upper floor of the east wing. She had cleaned it on Tuesdays for 6 years. She knew every surface of it, every book on the shelves, the way the light came through the window in the afternoon, the particular smell of the place, polish and paper and old leather. He was standing at the window when Oliver showed her in. He turned when she entered. Oliver closed the door. "Myra," he said. His voice was friendly, the friendliness of someone who has decided on their tone before you arrived. "Lord Ashville," she said. He gestured toward a chair. She stayed standing. He let it pass. He clasped his hands behind his back. He looked at her in a measured way that she recognized as the look of a man who has rehearsed something. "Last evening was unusual," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "King Kalan is," he paused, choosing words carefully, "an unconventional man. He is known for it. He makes choices at events like this that can be surprising. I have observed it before." She waited. "What happened last night was not a reflection of your standing in this house," he said, "or of any change in your position here." He cleared his throat once. "I want to be clear about that." There it was. She had known it was somewhere in the room. He was telling her, in the specific language of people with power, that what had happened publicly would have no private benefit. That she should not imagine the evening meant anything about her place in the world. That she was still exactly where she was yesterday morning. She looked at him. She thought about what to say. She thought about Nell's advice. She thought about 6 years. "I appreciate your clarity," she said. He blinked. He had expected something different. Gratitude, perhaps, or embarrassment. "Is there anything else?" she said. He looked at her for a moment. The rehearsed thing on his face shifted slightly. "No," he said, "that was all." She nodded. She moved toward the door. "Myra," he said behind her. She stopped, did not turn yet. "You are a good worker," he said. "I've always thought so. This house values that." She turned halfway, looked at him over her shoulder. "Thank you," she said. And left. She walked back down the corridor to the table where she had left the linens. She picked them up. She continued to the east bedrooms. She put the linens in the correct rooms. She came back down the stairs. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. She was wearing her face the way her mother had taught her, neutral and soft and giving nothing away. Inside, something was very quietly furious. Not at Asheville, not specifically. At the whole architecture of it. The way the warning had been dressed as a conversation. The way the reminder had been wrapped in a compliment. The way 6 years of good work was offered to her as a gift when it had always simply been hers, always been something she gave rather than received, always been the thing they took and never credited. She went through the rest of the afternoon. She was in the laundry room at 4, helping Nell with the sorting, when she heard the footsteps in the corridor outside. Measured, unhurried, coming in their direction. Nell heard them too. She glanced at the door. The door opened. One of the Northern Reach attendants stood in the frame, not Kalan's close guard. One of the formal staff, a man in his 40s with cropped silver hair and the bearing of someone who had been in service his entire life. He looked at Myra. "His Majesty would like to speak with you," the man said. Nell's hands went still on the fabric she was holding. Myra set down the sheet she was folding. She smoothed her apron. She looked at Nell. Nell's face was doing several things at once: concern, confusion. And underneath both of those, very carefully not showing on the surface, the smallest, most reluctant flicker of something that might have been hope. "All right," Myra said. She followed the attendant out of the laundry room, down the corridor, and toward the east garden entrance, where the afternoon light was low and gray-gold behind the rain, and where the king of the Northern Reach was standing with his hands in his pockets, looking at the wet garden as if it were telling him something. He heard her come out. He turned. He looked the same as last night, exactly the same. He had the quality of a person who looks the same in all lighting, in all rooms, in all circumstances, because they are not arranging themselves for the room or the lighting or the circumstances. They are just themselves, and that is a fixed thing. "You were in the laundry," he said. "I was working," she said. "I wanted to see you before I left," he said, simply, without decoration. She stood a foot away from him in the gray afternoon, in her working clothes, with her hair coming slightly loose from its pin. She looked at him. "You're leaving today." "Tomorrow morning," he said. The rain was soft on the garden. Somewhere a bird moved in the wet branches. "Asheville spoke to you this morning," Kalan said. "It was not a question." "How did you know?" "Because I know what kind of man he is," he said. "And I know what last night looked like, and I know what he would feel the need to manage this morning." He looked at her steadily. What did he say? She thought about whether to answer that. She decided to. He told me that what happened last night had no bearing on my standing in the house. Kalen was quiet for a moment. His jaw moved once slightly, as if something he had thought was confirmed. And what do you think about that? He said. I think he is probably right, she said, about the standing. Probably, he agreed. Then, Myra, I want to ask you something and I want you to answer it plainly the way you answer everything. She waited. Are you all right in this house? The question was so direct and so genuine and so different from everything else anyone had said to her in the past 24 hours that it stopped her fully. She stood there in the rain-smelling garden and felt the question land in a place that she had been keeping very carefully padded for a very long time. She thought about the true answer. She was alive, she was fed. She had her small room and her cracked mirror and Nell who was honest with her and mornings that were hers at 5 when the corridor was quiet and the work was just work. She was not unsafe. She was not, as far as she could measure such things, in danger. She was also not, as she stood there in her apron in the gray afternoon, entirely all right. I'm fine, she said. He looked at her for a long time. I believe that you believe that, he said. She met his eyes. I'm not someone who needs saving. I know, he said. I didn't come out here to save you. A pause. I came out here because I wanted to ask a question before I left, and I thought you deserved to be asked directly. She breathed. The rain was very quiet. Thank you, she said, and this time she meant it in the way you mean something when it costs you something to say. He nodded. He reached into his coat pocket. He took out a folded piece of paper. He held it out. She took it, unfolded it, read it. It was brief, an address, a name, a sentence that said, if you ever need to contact the Northern Reach House, this is where. She folded it again. She looked up at him. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this, she said. Nothing, he said, or something. Those are the only two options. The garden dripped around them. In the distance, the house bell sounded the quarter hour. She put the paper in her apron pocket. He looked at her one more time. She looked back. Goodbye, Myra, he said. Goodbye, she said. She went back inside. She went back to the laundry. She finished folding the sheets. She did not take the paper out of her pocket again until she was alone in her room that night, and even then she only unfolded it once, read it once, and folded it again and put it under the lining of her spare shoes. Just the address, just the name, just the sentence. She lay on her back in the dark and thought about very practical things. She thought about what she needed to do tomorrow. She thought about the East Corridor and the schedule and the linens for Tuesday. She thought about the question he had asked. Are you all right in this house? She pressed her eyes shut. No, she thought, not exactly. But she was not going to do anything about that tonight. Tomorrow she would think about it tomorrow, or the day after, or when she was ready. She had learned at some point in the last 6 years that waiting and doing nothing look the same from the outside, but from the inside they are very different things. One is giving up, one is preparation. She was very good at preparation. Outside the rain kept going, steady and honest and asking nothing from her. She fell asleep to the sound of it. He left on Monday morning. Myra knew it without seeing it. She knew by the change in the sound of the house, the particular quality of activity that comes when a significant guest is in the process of departure. The faster steps in the upstairs corridors, the voices with a different urgency in them, the carriages she heard on the gravel drive at 7 while she was on her knees in the East Corridor with her brush. She listened to the sound of the wheels on the gravel until she couldn't hear them anymore. Then she dipped the brush and went back to work. The house settled into itself again after that. It took a day or two, the way a pond takes a day or two after something has been dropped into it. By Tuesday the rhythm was largely restored. By Wednesday it was as if the gathering had not happened, or at least it would have been, except that it had happened, and everyone in the house carried it the way people carry things they are still processing. Myra carried it too. She carried it quietly, in the way she carried everything, which was without visible weight but with a specific awareness of what she was holding. She worked. Thursday afternoon she was in the upstairs linen room sorting the week's laundry when she heard footsteps that she recognized. Not by sound alone, by pace. Lady Seraphine moved at a particular speed, brisk and deliberate with the measured economy of someone who was always on the way to something. She paused outside the linen room door. There was a moment, the kind of moment that exists in a corridor before a person decides to enter or move on. She entered. Seraphine at close quarters was exactly what she appeared to be from across a room. Beautiful in the specific way of people who have maintained it carefully, dark-eyed, straight-spined, wearing her position the way some people wear their skin, so naturally that you forget it could ever come off. She looked at Myra. Myra looked back. This was different from the ballroom. In the ballroom, the power had been distributed across 300 people, and a gilded invitation, and a king on the other side of 50 feet. In this narrow linen room with its shelves of white and the small window above them showing the October garden, it was just the two of them. "I want to talk to you," Seraphine said. Myra set down the sheets she was holding. She waited. "What I am going to say is not a reprimand," Seraphine said carefully, "and it is not a threat. I want to be clear about that first." "All right," Myra said. Seraphine looked at the window briefly, then back. There was something in her posture that Myra hadn't seen before, a specific kind of straightness that isn't confidence. That's armor, the posture of a person who is going to say something real and is bracing for it. "He does this," Seraphine said, "Kaylan." Myra didn't say anything. "He moves through a room and he finds the thing that doesn't fit the room, the thing that's raw and honest and unperforming, and he reaches for it. He can't help it, it's the way he's built. Everything political and decorative bores him to the point of pain, and so when he finds something that isn't, she paused, chose the word carefully, gravitates." "You know him well," Myra said. "I have been in the same rooms as him for the better part of 8 years, Seraphine said. "At various gatherings, various occasions, I have watched him do this." She stopped. Something crossed her face, something that did not belong to the hard-edged woman in the pale gold dress, something older and quieter. "I watched him look at me like that, once, a long time ago." The linen room was very still. "What happened?" Myra said. Seraphine's chin lifted very slightly. "He remembered what he was, and I remembered what I was, and whatever might have been was filed in a drawer and the drawer was closed." She said it with the evenness of someone who had said it many times to themselves alone, enough times that the sharpest edges had been worn down to something manageable. Myra watched her. She thought about the way Seraphine had arranged herself in the ballroom on Saturday night. The pale gold dress and the perfect posture and the calculated angle at which she had positioned herself to be noticed. And suddenly she understood it differently, not as performance, as hope wearing performance as its only acceptable disguise. She felt something for Seraphine that she had not expected to feel, not sympathy in the soft sense, something more like recognition. "He gave me an address," Myra said, "before he left, a way to reach the Northern Reach house." Seraphine's expression went completely still. "I haven't used it," Myra said. "I don't know that I will." "Don't," Seraphine said. The word came out faster than the rest of what she'd said, sharper, then she steadied. "I'm not telling you that for the reason you think." "Then why?" Seraphine was quiet for a moment. She looked at the shelves, she looked at the window, she looked at Myra. "Because he means it," she said. "Whatever he said to you, whatever the address represents, he means it completely in the moment that he gives it. And then he goes back to his country and his council and his war meetings and his border disputes and the 1,000 weights that a man in his position carries, and the moment where he meant it completely becomes a very small thing in a very full life, and you are still here." She paused. "And you will have made choices based on a thing that was real when it was given, and then had to become smaller to survive everything else." Myra thought about that. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "You don't particularly like me." Seraphine looked at her, and something in the look was so unguarded, so unexpectedly direct that it was briefly startling. "No," she said, "I don't, but I know what it is to be the person standing at the edge of a very long fall, and I know what it looks like when someone else is standing in the same place, and I am a breath. I am telling you because I could have used someone telling me." They stood in the small linen room with the October light thin and pale through the window, and the house quiet around them. "Thank you," Myra said. Seraphine nodded once. She straightened the already straight fall of her dress with both hands, the gesture of someone reassembling themselves after being briefly, carefully open. "Don't be stupid," Seraphine said and left. Myra stood in the linen room for a long time after that. She picked up the sheets, she sorted them, she matched edges to edges with the automatic precision of years of practice. Her mind was doing several things at once and she let it, because stopping it would not have helped. She thought about what Seraphine had said. She thought about the address under the lining of her shoe. She thought about the way Kaylin had said the word decided on the dance floor, as if it were a remarkable thing. She thought about Lord Asheville's study and the conversation that had been a warning dressed as courtesy. She thought about 6 years and a cracked mirror and the 5 in the morning corridor that was, in some ways, the most honest part of her day. She thought about her mother. Her mother had been a woman who made decisions the way other people made meals, quietly and practically, and without waiting for permission. She had not asked anyone whether she was allowed to raise Myra with dignity. She had not asked whether it was appropriate for a woman in her position to expect things of the world. She had just decided, and then she had lived accordingly, and the world had arranged itself around her decision with a kind of grudging respect that she had never seemed to notice and had never seemed to need. Myra had spent 6 years in this house partly because of that. Partly because when everything else fell apart, this was where the money came from, and the money was the difference between her mother's hospital and not her mother's hospital, and there was nothing in the world she would not have carried for that. Her mother was gone now, 3 years ago, quietly on a Tuesday morning in the hospital that the money from this job had helped keep her in. Myra had been at work when it happened. She had found out at noon. She had worked until 6. Because stopping would not have brought her mother back, and because her mother would have told her that falling down was allowed but staying down was a choice, and she was not going to make that choice in Lord Asheville's house where anyone could see. She had gone to her room at 6. She had sat on the floor with her back against the bed. She had stayed there until morning. Then she had gotten up and gone back to work. That was 3 years ago. She finished sorting the linens. She stacked them on the correct shelves. She closed the linen room and walked down the corridor and down the stairs and through the kitchen and out the side door into the October garden. The air was cold. The garden was wet from recent rain. The beds were going dormant now, the last of the color leaving, the plants pulling themselves back and going underground for the winter. She stood on the path between the beds. She put her hands in the front pocket of her apron. She felt the edge of the address through the fabric of her uniform. She hadn't taken it from under the shoe lining. She had put a copy in her apron pocket that morning without deciding to, the way you pick up an umbrella on a cloudy day without consciously acknowledging that it might rain. She had not told Seraphine about the copy in her pocket. She was not sure why. She stood in the cold garden and she thought about Seraphine saying he means it completely in the moment that he gives it, and she thought about whether that was enough. Whether a complete and genuine thing, even one that had to become smaller to survive everything around it, was worth something. Whether it was better than nothing. Whether it was better than the alternative, which was not reaching for anything at all and staying exactly where she was until she became the linen room, the corridor, the cracked mirror, the apron pocket. She thought about what she wanted. It had been a long time since she had allowed herself to think about that directly. Wanting things in this house had always been a liability. You wanted, and then you had the wanting and the not having both, and the not having felt worse with the company. So she had trained herself out of it slowly and deliberately, the way you train yourself out of a habit. She had gotten very good at needing less, at finding the shape of satisfaction in the small certainties of the day. But standing in the cold garden with the address in her pocket and Seraphine's warning still sharp in her ears, she allowed herself, for one moment, to ask what she actually wanted. She wanted out of this house. Not because she was broken, not because she needed rescuing, because 6 years was enough, because she had been small for long enough that she no longer recognized the smallness as such, and that frightened her more than anything Seraphine had said. She wanted to know what she was like in a different room. She had been this version of herself for so long, the early morning version, the careful-footed version. The version that carried everything quietly and did not cost anyone anything, and was very good at not being noticed. She wanted to know if there was another version. If the woman who had walked into that ballroom and stood in the center of it and looked back at a king without looking down was a version of Myra that could exist outside of one evening in a green dress. She wanted to find out. She went inside, she went back to work. She did not take the paper out of her pocket again that afternoon. But she did not put it back under the shoe lining either. She kept it in her apron. She carried it through the afternoon and through the kitchen and through the dinner prep and through the evening cleanup. She carried it the way you carry a decision that hasn't fully declared itself yet. Present and warm and slightly heavy. At 9 that night she was the last one in the kitchen. The pots were clean, the surfaces were wiped, the fire was banked low. She stood in the middle of the kitchen in the almost dark and took the paper out of her pocket and unfolded it on the table. The address, the name, the one sentence. She stared at it. She thought about what Seraphine had said. She thought about what her mother would have said. Her mother would not have said be careful. She would have said something like, a thing worth having is worth the risk of losing it, because the alternative is never having had it, and that is its own kind of loss. She folded the paper. She carried it to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed. She found the page from her small personal book of letters, the one she kept for correspondence she was always meaning to write and never did. She took out her pen. She wrote. She wrote simply, without excess, without performing anything. She introduced herself. She said she had been thinking. She said she wanted to know if the address was still valid. She said that was all. She held the letter. She read it back. It was honest. It was careful. It was everything she could say without pretending she knew more than she knew or wanted more than she was ready to admit to wanting. She put it in an envelope. She wrote the address on the outside. She did not mail it that night. She set it on the table. She got into bed. She turned her face to the window. The sky outside was clear for the first time in days, cold and enormous and full of stars. She looked at it for a long time. In the morning she thought she would decide. She fell asleep before she had finished the thought. She mailed the letter. Not on Tuesday morning, as she had told herself she would decide. Not on Wednesday, when she carried it to the main corridor and then back to her room twice. On Thursday morning, before she could think about it further, she walked to the estate's post office at the edge of the village, 20 minutes on foot through the cold, and handed the envelope to the woman behind the window and turned and walked back before her own hesitation could catch up with her. She told herself, walking back, that it was just a letter. That a letter was just words on paper sealed in an envelope, that it was not a promise or a commitment or a bridge burned in either direction. She told herself all of that very firmly and somewhat unconvincingly. By Friday, the letter was somewhere in the postal system, moving north. She could imagine it in transit the way you imagine anything you have sent out that you cannot take back, somewhere on a road, somewhere in a bag, moving through the country by the same roads everyone used, unremarkable and ordinary, carrying the unremarkable ordinary words of a person who had 6 years of early mornings behind her and one evening in a green dress, and something she could not yet name clearly in front of her. She worked. She was very focused on work that week. She was thorough in a way that even exceeded her usual thoroughness, which was already considerable. She stripped and remade 7 beds. She reorganized the linen closet by a system more logical than the existing one. She fixed the loose tile near the base of the second column in the grand hall because it had been annoying her for 6 years and no one else was going to. Nell noticed the tile. She noticed it on Saturday morning when she was carrying laundry through the hall, and she stopped and looked at it and looked at Myra, who was working at the other end of the hall. "Did you fix the tile?" Nell called. "It needed fixing," Myra said. Nell stood there for a moment with a complex expression on her face. Then she continued with her laundry. At 4 that afternoon, Nell found her in the kitchen and put a cup of tea in front of her without asking. "You mailed the letter," Nell said. Myra looked at the tea. "I didn't tell you about the letter." "You didn't have to," Nell said. She sat down across from her. "You've been reorganizing things. When you're unsettled, you reorganize things. You did the same thing after your mother died." Myra wrapped her hands around the cup. The tea was the right temperature. Nell was very good at making tea the right temperature, which was a skill Myra respected more than most people would. "I don't know what I'm doing," Myra said. She said it simply, without distress, just a fact. "I know," Nell said. "I wrote to him because I wanted to know if it was real," Myra said. "I wanted to know if it was a thing that existed in that room and only in that room, or a thing that existed in the actual world where everything is not gold-lit, and I am not in a green dress, and there is no music." Nell nodded. "And I know that writing to him doesn't answer that question," Myra said. "But I couldn't not write to him. I could not continue in this house, doing exactly this day after day while the question was sitting there unanswered. So you mailed it. So I mailed it. Nell was quiet for a moment. She turned her own cup slowly on the table. What do you think he will say? Myra thought about it honestly. I don't know, I think he might not say anything. I think whatever existed in that hall on Saturday night might be exactly what Seraphine said. It was a real thing that became smaller because of everything around it. She paused. And I think if that's what it is, I need to know that. I need to know it is that so I can stop holding the question and start deciding what to do next. And what would you do next? Nell said quietly. Myra looked at her tea. Leave, she said. I think I would leave. She had not said it out loud before. She heard it in the air between them, the word she had been moving toward for months without quite letting herself see it clearly. Leave. Nell was quiet for long enough that Myra looked up. Nell's face was doing something very careful. There was something in it that was unhappy and something in it that was also, underneath the unhappiness, relieved. I have been waiting for you to say that, Nell said. Myra blinked. I have been watching you, Nell said, for 6 years. And I have watched you make yourself smaller and smaller to fit in this house, and I have watched you be good at it because you are good at everything you apply yourself to, and her voice was steady but something in it was compressed, the way a person's voice sounds when they are feeling something they are keeping from becoming too large. I have thought many times that you were wasted here. That is not a kind thing to think about a person's situation, but I have thought it. Myra looked at her. This is my house, Nell said. I mean that, I have been here 20 years. This is mine in the way that things become yours when you have given most of your life to them, and I will miss you if you go, she said it plainly, but I would also be glad. Myra felt something she was not going to describe to herself in that kitchen. She felt it and held it carefully, and then set it in the place where she kept things that were too large to look at directly but too important to put down. Nothing has happened yet, Myra said. He may not reply. He may not, Nell agreed. They sat with their tea. The kitchen was quiet around them. Outside, the late October light was thin and gold and horizontal, coming in through the window at an angle that made the whole room feel warmer than it was. 9 days passed. On the 9th day, a letter arrived. She knew it was from the Northern Reach before she opened it. The handwriting on the envelope was different from any she had seen in this house. It was direct and unhurried, letters formed with precision but without excess ornament, the writing of a person who had more to say than they spent time on presentation. She carried it back to her room. She sat on the bed. She held it for a moment. She opened it. It was short, 4 paragraphs. She read them once quickly, then again slowly, and then a third time with the particular attention you give to words you want to be sure you are understanding correctly. He said he had been glad to receive her letter. He said this plainly and without performance. He said he had thought about what she had written, specifically the part where she asked whether the address was still valid, and that the answer was yes. He said that he wanted, if she was open to it, to continue writing, that he was not a man who reached for things for the sake of novelty, and that whatever had drawn his attention on that Saturday evening was not a quality that resided in gilded ballrooms or formal occasions. He thought it was something that would hold its shape in other light. The last paragraph was different from the others. The others were careful. This one was not. This one was simply a man saying something honestly. He said that he was not going to pretend he knew what this was or where it led, that he was not a person who made promises he could not keep, but that he had gone back to the Northern Reach and sat in the rooms of his own house and found that he was still thinking about a woman in a simple green dress standing in the center of a room that had not wanted her, and that this was unusual enough that he thought it was worth being honest about. That was the end of the letter. Myra sat on her bed for a long time. She thought about what Seraphine had said. She thought about what Nell had said. She thought about what her mother would have said, which she knew, which was the thing about a thing worth having. She thought about the letter in her hand, which was as honest as she had hoped, and also somewhat more terrifying for being exactly as honest as she had hoped. She wrote back that evening. She wrote longer than the first letter. She told him some things she had not planned to tell anyone in this house or connected to it. She told him that she had asked Lord Asheville for 3 days of personal leave the previous year, for the anniversary of her mother's passing, and had been granted 2 and expected to make up the 3rd. She told him this not to complain about it, but because she had found in the past week that there were things she had accepted as normal that she was no longer entirely sure were normal, and she was making an inventory. She told him she was making an inventory. He would understand that. She thought he was the kind of person who would understand what an inventory meant and why a person would make one. She sealed the envelope. She set it on the table. She looked at it. 6 years in a house that had cost her things she had not even noticed losing. And now a letter on a table and a question in it. And somewhere north of here, a man who had said he was thinking about her with an honesty that had no angle to it. She was frightened. She was also, in a way she had not been in some time, alive to the future in a way that felt like something other than waiting. The difference was thin, barely measurable, but she knew the difference from the inside, and from the inside it was considerable. She took the letter to the post on Saturday morning and watched it disappear behind the counter and walked back in the November cold. When she got back to the house, Lady Seraphine was standing in the entrance corridor. She had clearly come in from outside, her coat still on, her gloves in one hand. She looked at Myra. Myra looked back. Seraphine said nothing for a long moment. She was doing her calculating thing, her face very still and assessing. Then she said, "You mailed something." "Yes," Myra said. A pause. "How many letters?" Seraphine said. "2." Seraphine nodded, very slowly, as if checking something against a calculation she had already run. He replied, Seraphine said, "It was not a question." "Yes," Myra said. Seraphine looked at her for a long time. Then she looked at the wall slightly to the left of Myra, which was where people looked when they were genuinely thinking rather than performing thought. "Don't expect him to be simple," Seraphine said finally. "He isn't. He will give you honesty, he will give you attention. He will make you feel," she stopped, started again, "seen in the exact way that is most difficult to recover from if it ends. He is not a careless man, but he has 100 obligations that existed before you, and they will not step aside, and you will need to decide whether a thing that is real but also difficult is something you want." "That's a question everyone faces," Myra said, "in any situation." "Yes," Seraphine said, "but not everyone faces it with a king." She walked past Myra toward the stairs. On the 3rd step she stopped without turning. "If he asks you to come north," she said, "think before you answer, really think." Myra watched her go up the stairs. She stood in the corridor with the cold of outside still on her coat and thought about really thinking. She was, she considered, already doing quite a lot of it. She had been doing almost nothing else for 2 weeks. The problem with really thinking was that you reached a point where thinking was no longer the useful activity, and doing became the only honest next step. She was getting close to that point. She went back to work. She cleaned the east corridor. She helped with lunch. She reorganized the storage room off the kitchen that had been half-organized wrong since she arrived and had bothered her every single day since. She worked until 6. She ate. She sat in her room. She looked at the cracked mirror. She thought about versions of herself and which one was most real. She thought about the one who scrubbed stone at 5 in the morning, and the one who had walked into the ballroom in a green dress and stood in the center without flinching, and the one who had just mailed her 2nd letter north. Those were all the same person, she thought. They were all the same. The difference was that 2 of them were very small in this house, and one of them had been, for the duration of one Saturday evening, exactly the size she was. She went to bed. In the morning there would be work. In a week or 2 there would be another letter. In the meantime she would continue to be every version of herself in this house, the one who scrubbed and the one who noticed things and the one who kept the inventory. She was the inventory now, she thought, all of it. Every item in it. The question was what she intended to do with the list. She closed her eyes. The house settled around her, all its rooms and its corridors and its histories, familiar in the way of something you have inhabited so long you cannot see it anymore but can feel its edges in the dark. She felt the edges. She breathed. She slept. The 3rd letter arrived on a Wednesday, and then the 4th on a Friday the following week. And then they came more frequently, and the gap between them shortened, and Myra stopped being surprised when she found an envelope at her door and started being very slightly surprised when she did not. She wrote back to everyone. She wrote at night after work, sitting at the small table in her room with the lamp low, and she wrote in the same way she did everything, which was with complete attention and without performing anything. They did not write to each other about easy things. They did not write about weather or the news from the capital or the matters of state that filled his days. They wrote about what they noticed, what they thought about, what they had decided and how and what the deciding had cost. He wrote in the fifth letter about a decision he had made at 23 that had seemed very clear at the time and had only gradually revealed its full shape, the way certain choices do, not all at once but slowly, the real weight of it arriving over years. He wrote about it plainly, without self-pity. He wrote about it the way you write about something you have made your peace with while still being honest about the cost. She wrote back about the Tuesday her mother died. She had never written about that to anyone. She had never talked about it fully to anyone, not even Nell, not in the way where you say everything rather than enough. She wrote it to him because his letter had asked for honesty without asking for it directly, simply by offering it, and she found that she could give it the same way. She sent that letter and then stood very still in her room for a long time afterward, the way you stand after you have done something you cannot undo, and you are deciding whether you regret it. She did not regret it. His reply came faster than usual. It was also longer than usual. He did not try to match her honesty with something equivalent, because he was not that kind of man, the kind who measures and mirrors. He just wrote. He wrote about grief and about the specific loneliness of being surrounded by people who mean well and still cannot reach you in the place you are, because the place you are is somewhere private and the people who mean well are standing at the door of it. He said this and then he said, "You know this place. I can tell from the way you wrote." She read that sentence 3 times. She folded the letter and put it with the others. She was keeping the letters. She had put them in the cardboard box she kept under her bed that held the things she did not want anyone to access casually. The box had always held her mother's photograph, and the papers from the hospital and her personal financial accounts, and the small things that had no practical use but that she could not give away. Now it held letters too, growing into a pile. She was not the only one in the house who had noticed the letters arriving. She knew this. She had always known this. An envelope with northern handwriting, arriving every week or so, addressed by name to a maid in the lower staff, that was not a thing that went entirely unobserved in a household that ran partly on observation. Lord Asheville summoned her again in mid-November. This time he did not offer her the chair and he did not begin with warmth. He was standing behind his desk when she came in, and he gestured for her to close the door, and when she had he said without preamble, "You've been corresponding with King Kaylan." She had expected this. She had known it was coming. She had prepared for it the same way she prepared for difficult things, which was by thinking them through clearly in advance so that when they arrived they were not surprises and she was not knocked off balance. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. He was a man who had cultivated patience as a professional tool. She watched him employ it now, the deliberate pause that was meant to create pressure. "I'd like you to understand something," he said. Kaylan of the Northern Reach is not just a man who passes through rooms and has a kind word for the interesting ones. He is a political figure. His correspondence is monitored. His associations are noted by people in several countries. His personal life is a matter of record in places you have never considered. "I understand that he is a king," Myra said. "I'm not sure you understand what that means in practice," Asheville said. He wasn't unkind. He was actually, she thought, being honest, and that was unusual enough that she listened. "It means that if this correspondence continues and it is noted and it will be noted, there will be questions asked about this house and about me, and about why a member of my domestic staff is in personal contact with a foreign crown." He stopped. He let that sit. She thought about it. She had thought about it actually already. She had thought about what letters meant in terms of record. She had thought about the position she was asking him to be in, without asking, simply by writing. "I hear what you are saying," she said. "I am asking you to end the correspondence," he said. She looked at him. "I am not ordering you," he said carefully. "You are a free person, but I am asking you, as the person who runs this house and who has your wages and your lodging in his hands, to understand that there are consequences to this that extend beyond yourself. The wages and the lodging." He said it carefully, that phrase, not as a threat, as a clarification of stakes. That was the kind of man he was, she thought. The kind who did not raise his voice, because he did not need to. He simply made the shape of the situation clear. She looked at him for a moment. "I'll think about what you've said," she said. He nodded. He had expected, she thought, either yes or argument. He was not entirely sure what to do with "I'll think about it." She used that. She went back downstairs. She went to the kitchen. She stood at the window for a few minutes looking at the November garden, which was completely bare now, all bones and grey light. Then she went to find Nell. Nell was in the upstairs sitting room, replacing the covers on the furniture that went unused in the cold months. It was quiet work, and Myra helped her and said nothing for several minutes, until the room was done. "Asheville spoke to me," Myra said. "I know," Nell said. She was folding the excess cloth carefully. She said it without looking up. "He wants me to end the correspondence." "I know," Nell said again. "Then what are you going to do?" Myra thought about this. She thought about it honestly, without the layer of should or shouldn't that would have complicated it. Just what she was actually going to do. "I don't know yet," she said. Nell finished folding the cloth. She set it on the stack. She turned around and looked at Myra with her direct, careful eyes. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "Yes." "This house," Nell said, "has asked things of you since you arrived. It has taken your time and your labor and your early mornings and your privacy. It has asked you to be small and to stay small and to be grateful for the chance to do it." She paused. "And you have given it all of that, 6 years of all of that, and now you have something that belongs to you and only to you, and it is asking you to give that up too." "He made a fair point about the consequences," Myra said. "He made a point about his own discomfort," Nell said evenly, "which he framed as a consequence for you. Those are different things." Myra looked at her. "You don't owe this house your personal life," Nell said. "Your labor, yes, he pays you for that. But who you write letters to in the evening in your own room with your own pen on your own paper is yours. It was always yours. No salary covers that." They stood in the cold sitting room with its covered furniture, the shapes of chairs and tables under white cloth like the room holding its breath, and Myra thought about what Nell had said. She thought about what Asheville had said. She thought about the letters under her bed in the cardboard box. She thought about what it meant to owe a house your labor and nothing more. "You're right," she said, not to end the conversation because she meant it. She wrote to Kaylin that night, not about Asheville. She wrote something different. She wrote something she had been moving toward for several letters and had been finding ways around, and this time she went directly to it. She wrote, "I want to tell you something, and I need you to take it as information rather than as an invitation, because I am still working out what the invitation would even be. I have been in this house for 6 years, and I think I am ready to leave it. I am not leaving because of you. I am leaving because I have been conducting an inventory, as I mentioned, and the inventory has come back short. But I am aware that when a person has spent a long time making themselves fit a particular shape, the question of what shape they actually are is complicated to answer. So I am telling you this as information. I am not asking you for anything." She put the pen down. She read it back. It was true. Every word of it was true, in the way that the things you say when you are most honest with yourself are true, which is to say imperfectly and completely at the same time. She sealed the letter. She set it with the others going out tomorrow. She sat in her room and looked at the cracked mirror. She thought about shape, about the shape you become and the shape you are underneath that. She had been the Asheville house shape for 6 years. Before that, the shape of her mother's daughter. Before that, the shape of a girl who was still deciding. She thought she was still deciding. She thought that might be okay. That deciding might not be a place you arrived at but something you kept doing, and that the decision to keep doing it rather than stopping was itself a kind of answer. She went to sleep. In the morning she put the letter in her apron pocket and walked through the early cold to the post office and sent it north, and then she walked back. It was a clear morning, cold and sharp and full of pale winter light. The gravel crunched under her feet. Her breath was visible in the air. The estate gardens on either side of the path were still bare, still waiting, the way things in winter wait, not dead but held. She walked back to the house. She went inside. She went to work. She cleaned the ground floor. She helped with breakfast. She reorganized the storage cupboard in the north corridor that had been wrong since August. She noticed, still reorganizing things. That was all right. Reorganizing things was honest. It was her way of dealing with the unresolved by making the resolvable orderly. There was nothing wrong with it. There was nothing wrong with cleaning a floor or sorting a shelf or replacing a loose tile. There was value in these things. She did not need to defend the value to anyone. She just also, now, wanted to know what she was like in a room that did not require her to make herself small. That was all. That was the inventory. One item seen clearly at last. She wanted to be the size she was. She folded the last towel in the cupboard, she aligned the edges, she closed the door. She went on with her morning. The letter that came back was the longest he had written. She could feel the weight of it in the envelope before she opened it, the pages inside it making the paper full in a way the earlier, shorter letters had not. She was in her room, still in her work clothes, the lamp lit against the early dark of November. She sat on the edge of the bed and held the envelope for a moment. She opened it. He had written in his usual hand, but more of it. He wrote about what she had said, the thing about the inventory and the shape you become and the shape underneath that. He said he understood this more directly than she might have expected, that the position he occupied required a shape too, and that he had worn it long enough to know the outline of himself within it and where the outline pinched. He said this without self-pity and without complaint. Just the statement of a man who was also, in his own way, conducting an inventory. Then he wrote something she read twice before she let herself process it. He wrote that he had something he wanted to say, and that he was going to say it plainly, because he did not know how to say it any other way, and because she had made it clear from the first letter that plainness was the thing she could work with. He said he had not written to anyone the way he had written to her, not since he was very young and the world was still a thing that surprised him regularly. He said that the correspondence had become, in the weeks since the gathering, the thing in his week he looked forward to with the most consistency, which he was aware was an unusual thing to say to a woman he had danced with once in a borrowed evening. He said he was not going to make promises he could not keep. That was the sixth sentence of that paragraph, and she could tell it was the one he had spent the most time on because the others flowed easily, and this one had the particular cadence of something composed rather than written. He was not going to make promises he could not keep, but he wanted to ask her directly and honestly whether she would consider coming to the Northern Reach. Not as a maid, not as staff. Not in a position that required her to be the Asheville house shape or any shape that was not hers. As a person, to see, as he put it in exactly these words, what the other light looks like. There was a practical component in the second-to-last paragraph. He said that his household maintained an advisory position for estate management, that the person who had held it for 12 years had retired in the summer and the position was still unfilled, that it was the kind of work that required someone who understood the practical running of large households, and who had, in his words, the particular intelligence of a person who has had to be useful rather than decorative. He said he was telling her this so that she had a practical framework to consider, not because he thought a framework was the whole point. The last paragraph was very short. It said, "I am not asking you to decide now. I am asking you to know that the door is open. This is true regardless of what you decide. But I am also not going to pretend, because you would see through it, that I am making this offer for purely practical reasons." She put the letter down on the bed. She sat very still. Outside, the wind moved through the trees along the north edge of the estate. She could hear it through the small window, a low, steady sound. She sat with the letter for a long time, not reading it. Just sitting with it, the way you sit with something that has arrived and changed the shape of the room it arrived in. She thought about what she felt. She was systematic about this, because she was systematic about difficult things, and because feeling something clearly was more useful than feeling it in the vague, overwhelming way that led to decisions made sideways rather than head-on. She felt she ran through the catalogue carefully, frightened. Yes, in the way you are frightened when something you wanted has the actual possibility of arriving and you have to decide whether wanting it and having it are the same kind of courage. They were not. She had learned this. Wanting something at a distance is one kind of act, moving toward it is another. She felt uncertain, yes, about what she would find in the Northern Reach, about whether the version of herself she had been in this house was representative of all the versions, or whether it was the result of 6 years of compression, and the true version was something she had not actually met yet. She felt, and this took longer to locate, because it was underneath the other things, resting there like the actual floor under a rug, something that might be called hopeful. She held that word carefully because it was the kind of word that could embarrass you badly if you used it too early or too often. But it was there. A real thing, warm and solid and present. She was hopeful. She went to bed with the letter on the table, and she slept better than she had in 2 weeks. In the morning she woke at 5. The usual time. She lay in the dark for a moment before she got up. She thought about the letter. She thought about the northern reach which she had never been to, which was a different kind of country than this one, colder and wider and less ornamented, from what she understood. She thought about Nell. She got up, she dressed. She did not go to the corridor first. She went to the kitchen, because Nell was always in the kitchen by 5:30, putting on water and starting the things that needed starting before the household came alive. Nell was there exactly as expected. She looked up when Myra came in. She read Myra's face. She was very good at reading faces. "He's asked you to come north," Nell said. "Yes," Myra said. Nell nodded slowly. She turned back to the pot on the stove. She adjusted the heat without looking. Her hands knew what to do. "Sit down," she said. "I'll make tea." Myra sat at the kitchen table. The room was warming from the stove. The early dark was in the window. In an hour the house would start to move and the kitchen would fill and the day would begin the way days always began here, with the practical weight of everything that needed doing. But for now it was just the two of them, and the kettle, and the low sound of the stove. "Tell me," Nell said. Myra told her, not all of it, the shape of it, the practical piece about the advisory position, the honest piece about the other light. Nell listened without interrupting. "And what do you want to do?" Nell said. "I want to go," Myra said. The words were out before she had finished deciding to say them, which was, she recognized, its own answer. Nell brought the tea to the table. She set a cup in front of Myra. She sat down with her own. They were quiet for a moment. "Then you should go," Nell said. "I don't know what I'll find there," Myra said. "I don't know if the correspondence translates to the actual world. I don't know what he is like in his own house versus in a gilded hall at someone else's event. I don't know if I can do the work they want. I don't know if I am as resilient outside of this house as I am inside it." "No," Nell said, "you don't know any of that. That's a lot of not knowing." "It is," Nell said. She wrapped her hands around her cup. "But you also know some things. You know what 6 more years of this house would look like. You know what staying costs. You know what the inventory said." She paused. "You know yourself. You have always known yourself, even when this place tried to make you forget." Myra looked at the steam rising from the tea. "I've never lived anywhere but here and my mother's house. I know. The northern reach is very different." "Yes. I'll be starting from nothing there. No history, no Nell." She said it plainly, but she heard the weight of it as she said it, the particular weight of that last part, the thing she did not fully let herself look at. Nell heard it too. Her face did something quiet. "No Nell," she agreed. "That's true." Myra looked at her. "But you'll write," Nell said. "Of course I'll write. And I'll be here." "You'll be here," Myra said. They sat with their tea. The stove was warm. The kitchen smelled of the morning. "Myra," Nell said after a while. "Yes. If you stay because you are afraid of going, I will be angry with you for a long time." Myra looked at her. "I didn't know you were capable of being angry." "I am capable," Nell said, "of several things people underestimate me for." Myra almost smiled. The almost smile was the closest thing to a full one she had managed in several days. "I'm going to write back to him today," Myra said. "Good. I'm going to say yes." Nell nodded once, just once, and then she turned back to the stove. Myra wrote the letter at noon, on her break, sitting in the small room off the corridor with a piece of paper on the table and her pen in her hand. She wrote, "Yes, I would like to see the other light. I am coming with questions and no guarantees and the full knowledge that this is a considerable thing to do and that I am doing it anyway. I need 3 weeks to give appropriate notice and pack and arrange the things that need arranging." She stopped there. She thought about adding something more. She thought about whether more was needed. She decided it was not. The yes was enough. The 3 weeks was practical. The rest of it would be in the doing. She sealed the letter. She mailed it that afternoon. She went back to the house and knocked on Lord Asheville's study door at 4 o'clock. Oliver answered and showed her in. Asheville was at his desk. He looked up. "I would like to give my notice," Myra said. He was quiet for a moment. He set his pen down. His face was very still in the way of a man receiving information he had not been expecting and was now incorporating. "I see," he said. "I will finish the month. I will ensure everything in my current area of responsibility is fully handled before I leave, and that the handover is complete." He looked at her. He was assessing. She let him. "You're going north," he said. She did not ask how he knew. He was the kind of man who knew things. That was his nature. "Yes," she said. He nodded very slowly. He picked his pen back up. He looked at the desk rather than her. "I hope it is what you are expecting," he said. "I don't know what I'm expecting," she said. He looked up at that, and something in his face, just briefly, was not the assessing face, was something closer to the face of a man who had once been younger and had made choices that he thought about now in the quiet of his study. "No," he said, "you usually don't." "That's all," she said. "Thank you for the 6 years." She left. She went downstairs. She went to the kitchen. She sat at the table and looked at her hands. She was leaving. She had said it out loud to the man who ran the house, and it was real now. The way things become real when you say them out loud to the people who have the most invested in them staying unsaid. She thought about the next 3 weeks. She thought about the things she needed to do. She thought about her mother's photograph in the box under the bed and how she would carry it. She thought about the green dress on the hook and whether she would take it. She would take it. She heard Nell in the corridor outside, and the sound was so familiar and so particular to this place. That step with its slightly heavier left than right, that Myra sat still for a moment and let herself feel the full weight of what she was leaving. It was considerable. She had given a long time to this place. A long time and a great deal of herself, more than she had ever fully inventoried. The corridors she knew by dark, the tiles she had fixed, the windows she had cleaned until the light came through cleanly, the kitchen table where she had drunk 10,000 cups of tea, Nell's voice. The 5 in the morning quiet. She sat with all of it. She did not push it away. She did not minimize it. She let it be real and large and important because it was, because she had made it so by living it, and a thing is worth what you have given to it. Then she breathed. Then she got up. There was work to finish. There always was. She had 3 weeks to do it in, and she intended to do it the same way she had done everything in this house, which was well, and without leaving anything undone. She tied her apron. She went back to work. The afternoon was long and ordinary, and she moved through it with the particular quiet clarity of a person who has made a decision, and is now on the other side of the deciding, in the place where you simply act. She was leaving. She was going north. She was going towards something she did not fully know, in a life that was about to be entirely different, carrying a photograph and a box of letters and a green dress, and the knowledge of who she was that she had been quietly tending for 24 years. It was enough to carry. It was exactly the right amount. She cleaned the east corridor at 5, and it was, as it always was, the most honest part of her day. Just her and the floor and the early dark quiet and the brush going back and forth across the stone, following the grain the way it was meant to be followed. She would miss the morning corridor. She would find another one. The 3 weeks were strange in the specific way that last things always are. She had experienced this before. The last weeks of her mother's life had that quality, where ordinary days stopped being ordinary because they were the last of their kind, and you tried to look at them normally and couldn't quite, because you knew what they were. These were different in direction, not an ending for its own sake, a threshold, but threshold time had the same quality, the same surplus of meaning attached to ordinary acts. She noticed things she had not noticed in years, the sound of the house settling at night, the way the light moved across the kitchen floor from 7 in the morning to noon, the smell of the stone corridors after they had been cleaned. She did not sentimentalize these things. She just noticed them, the way you take careful note of a place you are about to leave, not because you are sure you will miss it, but because you know you will want to remember what it actually was, rather than what distance makes it become. She worked through every day fully. She reorganized nothing in the final week because she had reorganized everything already, and there was nothing left to reorganize, and she recognized this as itself a kind of completion. She finished her responsibilities in each area of the house with the same care she brought to everything. She wrote out her methods for the linen room, the cleaning schedules, the things she had learned over 6 years about how to manage the East Wing efficiently, and she left these notes on the supply room table for whoever would take over. She did this not because Asheville had asked her to, she did it because it was the right thing to do. On her last Thursday, she found herself in the Grand Hall. She was not supposed to be in the Grand Hall that afternoon. She had finished her work early and had taken the long route back through the East Wing, and the long route went past the south entrance of the Grand Hall, and the door was open and she went in. It was empty in the way of a room that is waiting, all the furniture restored to its formal positions, the tables cleared. The chandeliers dark, the candles not yet lit. She walked to the center of the floor. She stood on the pale stone. She looked around the room, the vaulted ceiling, the painted panels, the tall windows with the November afternoon coming through them, pale and directional, falling in long strips across the floor. She thought about the Saturday evening a month and a half ago, the music and the candlelight and 300 people and the green dress and the gilded invitation pinned to her chest. She thought about walking in through the south doors and standing in exactly this spot. She thought about standing exactly here right now. It was the same spot, the stone was unchanged, the hall was unchanged, she was the one who was different. Or perhaps not different exactly, more herself. As if the month and a half since that evening had been a process of coming back into focus, the way something becomes clear through a lens when the distance is adjusted. She stood there for a moment in the quiet hall. Then she went to find Nell. Nell was in the upstairs linen room, which was where she spent most of her late afternoons in winter. She looked up when Myra came in. She saw Myra's face. "Almost time," Nell said. "Day after tomorrow," Myra said. She sat down on the small stool in the corner. Nell kept working, her hands steady on the cloth. The linen room was warm from the small radiator in the corner and smelled of clean cotton and the particular old wood smell of the shelves. They sat in a comfortable silence for a while. Myra had always appreciated that Nell could do this, could share a room without filling it with words. It was a rare skill, and she had not always credited it properly. "Tell me something," Myra said. "Tell me something about after, what you'll do." Nell thought about it. "Same as I've always done," she said. "This house, this work, it's mine." She was matter-of-fact about it, not defensive. "I don't want what you're wanting, Myra. I want this. That's not a failure of imagination. It's just what's true for me." "I know," Myra said. "But I'll be glad to know you're somewhere better," Nell said. The words were simple, and Nell said them simply, and they arrived, as simple and simply said things often do, with considerable force. Myra looked at her hands. "I'll write to you," she said. "I'll tell you what the northern reach is like." "Tell me about the cold," Nell said. "I've always heard it's different cold up there, drier." "I'll tell you about the cold. And the house, what the rooms are like, what they need fixing. Every house has things that need fixing. You'll find them inside a week. Probably inside 3 days," Myra said. Nell smiled. It was a full, honest smile, the kind that doesn't need anything from you. They sat together until the radiator ticked and the late afternoon light went gray, and someone in the corridor outside called for Nell for something or other. Nell went. Myra sat in the linen room alone for a few minutes, just sitting, the way you sit in a room you know you are about to leave. She reached out and touched the edge of one of the shelves. The wood was smooth and worn, polished by years of hands passing over it. She did not know whose hands before hers. Years of the same motion, the same work, different people leaving a little of themselves on the surface. She took her hand away. She went to her room, she packed. There was not much, there had never been much. She had lived lean in this house because she could not afford to live otherwise, and because carrying things was something she had always been careful about. She had her clothes, a modest number, her mother's photograph wrapped in a cloth, the box of letters, which were the most valuable things she owned in the way that objects carry value, not in money but in meaning. The spare shoes with the address folded under the lining, long ago transferred to the proper place in her document envelope. The green dress. She packed the green dress last, folding it with the same care she folded everything, and laid it on top in the bag so that it would not be crushed. She stood in her room with the packed bag by the door and looked at the cracked mirror. She thought about all the mornings she had looked in it, all the versions of herself she had looked at from this angle in this light. The tired one, the careful one, the one that kept going, the one that had stood in a grand hall with a borrowed dress and a gilded invitation pinned to her chest. She thought about what version she was right now. All of them, she thought, all at once. She went to bed. She slept better than she had in a month. She was up at 4 the next morning because her body had been waking at 4 or 5 for so long that it would not have known how to sleep past it. She lay in the dark and breathed. The house was completely quiet around her. In an hour it would begin to move, the familiar sounds of its morning starting, but for now it was still. She got up. She dressed, she went down to the kitchen. Nell was already there. Of course she was, she would not have been anywhere else. She had made tea. She had also, Myra saw, made breakfast, more than Myra would have made for herself, the full warm kind with bread and eggs and the jam that Myra had always had a particular fondness for. She sat down, she ate. Nell sat with her and drank her tea, and they talked about ordinary things. They talked about the estate schedule for the coming week. They talked about the weather, which was cold and clear. They talked about a recipe Nell had been experimenting with for the Christmas pudding. They talked about everything except what was happening, because what was happening did not need to be talked about. At 7, the carriage that Asheville had arranged arrived in the drive. Myra had not asked him for this. He had arranged it without being asked. She had come to think in the final days that Asheville was a more complicated man than the version of him she had held in her head, and that the version of him she held would probably be revised further in retrospect. He was not a good man in the broad, simple sense, but he was not simple, and there were things in him that were genuine. She carried her bag down. Nell walked her to the door. At the door, they stopped. They looked at each other. 6 years of looking at each other across kitchen tables and linen rooms and corridors and the early morning kitchen. 6 years of honest company in a place that was not always honest. Nell held out her arms. Myra stepped into them. They held each other for a moment. Nell smelled of tea and lavender soap as she always had, and Myra held that and then let it go. They stepped back. "Go on," Nell said. Myra picked up her bag. She walked to the carriage. She got in. She did not look back at the house, not from stubbornness. Because she had already looked at it, really looked, in the grand hall and the linen room and her own small room. She had seen it. She was carrying it. She did not need to look at it again. She looked forward. The carriage moved. The gravel crunched. The estate gates opened, and then they were on the road, and the Asheville house was behind her and the road north was ahead. She sat back against the seat. She put her hands in her lap. She looked at the countryside moving past the window, bare-treed and frost-gray and clean. She was going towards something she did not fully know, in a life that was about to be entirely different, and she was doing it with open eyes and a steady heartbeat and exactly enough courage. The journey north was 3 days. She had never traveled 3 days from anything in her life. On the first evening she stopped at a roadside inn, a small and plain place with a low ceiling and a fire in the main room and a woman behind the counter who asked no questions and gave her a clean room. She ate alone in the common room, watching the fire. She was tired from the road. She was also, she noticed, lighter than she had been in years. She thought about that, about the lightness. She wondered if it was just the road, the strange feeling of moving. She had not moved, truly moved in any direction in a very long time. She thought it was not just the road. She thought it was the inventory completed, the thing it had added up to. The answer she had written in a letter and sent north, and was now following in a carriage 3 days behind the woods. She finished eating. She went to her room. She took out the box of letters. She held it for a moment, not opening it. She had read the letters many times. She did not need to read them again tonight. She put the box back in the bag. She thought about the Northern Reach. What she knew of it was partial and second-hand, and filtered through people who had their own opinions about cold northern kingdoms and men who ran them. She had decided deliberately not to assume, to arrive and see. That was the right approach to most things, she thought. She lay down, she slept. The second day of travel took her through country she had never seen, higher ground, wider sky. The particular spare beauty of a landscape that does not ornament itself, but holds its shape against winter with something that was not defiance but endurance. She watched it through the window and thought about what Seraphine had said about seeing things in different light. This was different light, literally. The angle of it at this latitude, the quality of it, the way it made the gray landscape silver rather than flat, the way it came through the window and fell across her hands. She looked at her hands. They looked the same as they always had, worn from work, strong hers. She was the same, she was in different light, both were true. On the third day, toward late afternoon, the landscape changed again, and the road climbed slightly, and when they came over a long low rise there was, ahead of them, a city. Not a grand city, a working one, stone-built and square-cornered and serious in a way that cities can be serious, built for function first and looking second. Towers and walls and gates, and beyond them, visible above the roofline, the upper floor of what could only be the northern house, the seat of the northern reach, its windows lit in the early dark of the December afternoon. The carriage driver called back to her, "The city, miss." She looked at it, she looked at the lights in the windows. She straightened her coat, she smoothed her hands on her skirt, she sat up. She was going to arrive at this city, and this house, and this life in the exact same way she had arrived at the Asheville gathering. With her eyes open. With nothing to prove and nothing to perform. With the full weight of who she was, which was considerable, even if certain people had spent years suggesting otherwise. The carriage moved toward the gate. The gate opened. She went in. The northern house was cold in its bones, the way old stone is always cold, no matter how many fires are lit in it. She felt it the moment she stepped inside, not unpleasant, just honest. A building that had not been built to charm anyone, that simply was what it was, the same way the landscape around it was what it was. It smelled of pine resin and old wood and something metallic that she could not immediately name, the particular combination of a house that is used and maintained but not perfumed. She liked it immediately. She did not tell herself she was going to like it, she just did. An attendant met her at the entrance, middle-aged, steady, with the manner of someone who managed the front-facing responsibilities of the house and had done it long enough to be unflappable. He introduced himself as Graham. He carried her bag without making a production of it. He showed her to her room, which was on the second floor of the east wing, and which was larger than any room she had occupied in the Asheville house and had 2 windows, both looking out over the interior courtyard. She stood in the room after Graham had left and looked at the 2 windows. 2 windows, she had had one for 6 years. One small, high-set window that let in a strip of sky. These 2 looked out over the courtyard, and through one of them she could see the kitchen garden, bare in December but with the clean architecture of well-organized beds that would, in spring, be full of things she could not yet imagine. She unpacked. She took her time about it. She put her clothes away with care. She set her mother's photograph on the table beside the bed. She put the box of letters in the drawer. She hung the green dress on the hook behind the door. She looked at it on the hook. It looked different here, the same dress, different room. She thought about that for a moment and then stopped thinking about it and went to wash her face and hands. Graham came back at 6 to take her to dinner. She had expected a formal thing, a dining room with multiple settings and several people, and the particular ceremonious quality of first evenings in new houses. What she found instead was a smaller room off the main corridor, a table set for 2, a fire going, and King Kalan standing at the window with a glass in his hand looking at the courtyard. He turned when she came in. He looked the same, exactly the same. She had been trying over the past weeks of letters to hold on to the specific quality of him, the particular way he filled a room without performing it, and she had been afraid that what she remembered was a construction, a version assembled from candlelight and music and the heightened quality of a very specific evening. She had been afraid that the real person would arrive and the construction would have to be dismantled, and she would have to start again from something more ordinary. He was not ordinary. He was the same person who had crossed a grand hall and asked her to dance. The same person who had written about grief and about the shape you become versus the shape you are. The same person who had stood in a wet garden and asked her directly, plainly, without artifice, whether she was all right. He was that person in this room, in his own house, at the end of a December day. "You arrived," he said. The 2 words carried everything. Relief and something underneath relief that was quieter and more complicated and entirely real. "I said I would," she said. He almost smiled. She was already familiar with the thing that came before his smile, the specific quality of the pause before he let it happen. "Come and sit," he said. They sat, they ate, they talked. This was the thing she had been most uncertain about, whether the conversation would translate. Whether the letters, which had been so easy and so honest, would carry over into the actual world of being in the same room, Correspondence has its advantages. You can think before you write. You can consider the word before you commit it to paper. The spoken word is different. It arrives and then it is already in the air before you can revise it. She did not need to revise anything. They talked about the journey. They talked about the city, which she had seen only briefly and in the dark and wanted to see properly. They talked about the northern reach, which was indeed colder and wider and more spare than the south, and which he described with the particular combination of pride and clear-eyed realism that people use when they love something and are not pretending it has no faults. They talked about the advisory position. He explained it with precision, what it involved, what the previous person had built in 12 years, where the gaps were, what he thought needed attention. He spoke to her as one person speaks to another when they believe the other person is capable of handling complete information, not simplified, not reduced, as it was. She listened, she asked questions. They were good questions and he answered them well, and she found herself already thinking, alongside the conversation, about the things she could see from what he was telling her, and what the first 3 months of work would look like. She had always thought well about the practical shape of a household. She had known this about herself, but she had not had room to use it. You could not suggest systemic improvements to a house where you were cleaning the floors. You could notice and file and think, which she had done, but the thought had nowhere to go. Here it would have somewhere to go. She thought about that quietly, alongside the dinner conversation. After dinner they sat by the fire. The conversation moved away from practical things and into the other kind, the kind they had been having by letter, and this was, as she had hoped, exactly the same. He said things he meant. She said things she meant. They did not perform for each other. At one point in a pause he said, "How does it feel?" "Strange," she said. "Good, mostly good, with the strange getting smaller." He nodded. He understood that. She could see him understanding it. "Are you afraid of anything specifically?" he said. She thought about it. "I'm afraid of building something here and then having it become something I have to carry the shape of," she said. "The way I carried the Asheville shape." She paused. "I'm afraid of doing it again." He looked at her steadily. "That is a reasonable thing to be afraid of," he said. "I want to be careful about that. I want you to be careful about that." "I will be," she said. "I also want to say," he started, and then was quiet for a moment, and she recognized it as the particular quiet of someone composing something they have been composing for a while. "I did not ask you here to fit anything. I asked you here because I wanted to know what you were like in this light. That was what I said." "I meant it." She looked at the fire. "I don't know yet what I am like in this light," she said. "I've been here 3 hours. "Yes," he said. "Give me some time," she said. "As much as you need," he said. She believed him. She believed him not because she was naive about what he was or about the complications that surrounded a person in his position, but because she had, over the course of many letters, developed a reliable sense of when he was telling the truth versus when he was telling a version of it, and this was the full truth. She looked at him, he looked at her. The fire was between them and the room was warm, and outside the cold December night was clear and full of stars. She was here. She was in this room, in this city, in this country that was different from where she had come from in the specific ways that mattered. And she was still herself, still Myra, still the person who had been made in the small house with the morning light, and the early grief and 6 years of stone corridors and one green dress, and a cracked mirror that she had looked at 10,000 times and always found the same face. She was here and she was herself, and the two things were not in conflict. That, she thought, was worth the journey. The next morning she was up at 5. The body does not unlearn its rhythms quickly. She dressed. She went out into the corridor of the east wing of the northern house in the winter dark, and the corridor was flagstone and wide and smelled of the same pine resin and old wood that the whole house smelled of. There was one lamp burning at the far end. She walked the corridor, just to know it, just to put her feet on it and feel the stone and understand the length and width of it and the way the floor sounded underfoot. At the far end was a flight of stairs going down. She took them. She found the corridor that connected to the kitchen garden entrance. She went through the door and stood in the garden in the cold early dark with her breath visible in the air and the stars still out above the walls. The beds were bare and sleeping. She walked along the stone path between them and looked at the organization of them. Good beds, well maintained. The tool storage at the far end was orderly. She opened the door and looked in at the organized tools, the clean lines of them on their hooks. She closed the door, she walked back along the beds. She reached the end of the path and stood there and thought about spring. About what these beds would be in spring. About what the kitchen would need in spring and what the household schedules would look like, and what the things that had been let go in the past year, the things Kaylan had mentioned last night, would need to regain their shape. She was already thinking about it. She let herself think about it. She walked back inside. The kitchen staff were beginning to move now, the earliest of them starting the morning work. A young woman was at the great stove with her back to the door, adjusting the heat on a pot. She heard Myra come in and turned. She was perhaps 18, dark-haired. She had the morning face of someone who had been working since before they were fully awake and had the particular look of someone new to a position and therefore slightly uncertain of everything. She looked at Myra. Myra looked at her. She saw, in the girl's expression, the particular combination of not knowing who this was and therefore not knowing whether to be formal or familiar, and she recognized it as a version of herself at 18, standing at the edge of every room and not yet knowing the trick of just walking in. "I'm Myra," she said. "I've just arrived. I'm going to be working in house management." The girl relaxed very slightly. "Clara," she said. "Are you on the breakfast prep?" Myra said. "Yes, sir." "The water in that pot," Myra said. She moved toward the stove and looked. "The temperature gauge is running hot. See how the needle is sitting? It'll be too hot in 5 minutes. She reached past her and adjusted the valve, not taking over, just showing. "Watch the needle. You want it to sit in the middle of that range." Clara looked at the gauge. She nodded. Myra stepped back. She went to the side table and found a cup and helped herself to the tea that was already prepared. She stood with it at the window. The courtyard was beginning to lighten. The east sky behind the house was going from black to the particular deep blue that is the color of very early morning, the color she had always loved best in the day, the color that felt like a held breath before the world started again. She drank her tea. Behind her, Clara was watching the gauge with the focused attention of someone who has just been given a clear and useful thing to do. Myra looked at the sky. She thought about Nell. She would write to her today. She would tell her about the corridor and the kitchen garden and the 2 windows and the morning. She would tell her about Clara and the temperature gauge. Nell would appreciate the temperature gauge. She thought about the months ahead, the work there was to do. The house to understand, its rhythms and its gaps and its particular logic, the specific way this house had learned to run and where it had gone sideways in the past year. She was already accumulating the information. She was already, quietly and automatically, beginning the process of understanding the shape of a new place. She thought about Kaylan, about last night and the fire and the honest conversation and the ease of it, the real ease, not performed ease but the ease of 2 people who have been learning each other's minds for weeks, and found that the minds translate into rooms. She thought about what she had said to him, "Give me some time." And what he had said, "As much as you need." She did not know what they were. She knew they were something. She knew that whatever the something was, it was built on a foundation that was not the gilded hall or the music or the green dress or the single extraordinary evening. It was built on pages of honest writing, on the willingness to say real things and stay with them when they were said, on the quality she had recognized in him on the very first evening, the fact of him being exactly the same person in all lighting. She was going to learn the shape of that. She was going to let herself take the time to learn it properly, without rushing towards something or away from something. She was going to be here. She was going to be herself here. She looked at the sky one more time. The deep blue was lightening at the edges now, the first pale suggestion of the sun not yet risen but thinking about it. She set her cup down. She turned back to the kitchen. Clara was watching the gauge correctly now, her attention steady on it. Myra went to the corridor and picked up the list that Graham had left for her the previous evening, the overview of the morning's household tasks. She read through it. She saw where the priorities were. She noted 2 things that could be consolidated, 1 redundancy in the scheduling, and 1 task that needed moving to before breakfast rather than after. She was already working. She was going to be good at this. She could feel it in the way she could always feel it when something was aligned with what she was actually built for. A quiet certainty that was not arrogance but accuracy. She went down the corridor to begin. The flagstone floor rang under her steps. The morning was coming into the windows now, pale and cold and northern and clean. The house was waking up around her, the sounds of it starting its day, and she moved through it with the same unhurried precision she had always moved through the work she was good at, the work that was hers. She had come from a place that had not been able to see the full size of her. She was here now. She was exactly the size she was. And that she found, standing in the morning corridor of the northern house in December light, with her work beginning and her letters to write and a green dress on a hook, and a conversation to continue with a man who looked at her with that specific clear attention, that attending that asked nothing from her but gave everything back. That was finally enough. Not because she had stopped wanting more, but because enough no longer meant less. Because enough in this light, in this house, at the beginning of this very particular life, meant full. She walked on. The morning was waiting.